tomatoes. It's almost summer, and that means fresh tomatoes are in season. We're gonna use this tomato. We're gonna turn this into tomato soup, and we're gonna make a grilled cheese to go with it, featuring bacon and tomato as well. Let's go. One of the reasons I love summer so much is that you start getting fresh tomatoes like this, or like this sort of greenish type tomato, or these really, really big ones. Lots of different ways that we can use these. I'm gonna put these down. I'm gonna break them. They're that right. One of the ways that you can use these, and actually one of my absolute favorite ways, is to make tomato soup. After all, it's Wednesday. You know what that means. It's Weeknight Wednesday, where I make a short, quick, and easy recipe that you can make on any weeknight. We're gonna turn some fresh tomatoes into a tomato soup and make a grilled cheese to go with it. Grilled cheese, tomato soup, these things just go great together. If you don't have fresh tomatoes, or you're watching this in a few months from when I'm filming it and it's not summer anymore, you can use canned tomatoes. Canned tomatoes are really, really good. A lot of the time, they're even better than tomatoes that you can buy, especially in the winters in colder climates. Don't feel like if you don't have fresh tomatoes that you need to turn off this video. It's all gonna turn out great, but let's jump in the kitchen and let's start making the easiest tomato soup that you can make on a weeknight. We're gonna start our tomato soup with tomatoes. I've got a few different kinds of tomatoes. That big heirloom tomato, some green tomatoes, and some basic red grocery store tomatoes. When you use fresh tomatoes to make a soup, you need to take the skins off, which is actually relatively easy. Make 2 small incisions in the bottom of the tomato, basically making an X, and then we're gonna put them in some boiling water. Just bring that water up to a boil. Once it's boiling, put the tomatoes in for about 30 to 45 seconds. We're not trying to cook the tomatoes here, but this boiling water is gonna help us take the skin off. Get some ice cold water on the side. This will stop the tomatoes from cooking when we take them out of the boiling water. And you can see the skin is starting to peel back. That's what we're looking for. This took about 30 seconds or so. Move the tomatoes into the ice water and leave that for about 5 minutes to cool off. While it's cooling off, we're going to prepare some vegetables. We've got some carrots. The sweet of the carrots is going to balance nicely with the acidity of the tomatoes. We're going to dice these. They don't need to be perfectly cut because everything's just going to get blended anyway. This is what mine look like. And now we're going to cut down some onions. I got a fair bit of onion here and a fair bit of carrot. Just going to take the skin off of the onions. Again, we're just going to dice these. Try to make them about the same size as your carrot so everything cooks in the same amount of time. These look pretty good like this. Let's set these aside. Now let's look at our tomatoes. Now that they are cool enough to handle, the skin should peel off really easily. Like, look how easy this is. They just peel right off, and then you can pull off the root end at the end and leave the skins on one side of the cutting board and your whole tomatoes on the other side. Get rid of the skins. We don't need those. I'm going to cut these down into quarters so that I can take out the little root end on the edge there. So I'm going to do this with all of my tomatoes. Cut them into quarters, take out the little stem end, and set the tomatoes aside. The root ends can go in the garbage, and then I'm going to try and get as much of the tomatoes and the juice into a bowl, and we can move on to our next step. Got some butter, and I'm going to melt down in a large pot over medium heat, and once it starts to foam, we can add in our vegetables. Both the carrots and the onions go into the pot. Stir it so that everything's combined. Now we're going to cook this over medium heat for about 10 minutes to remove some of the water and intensify the flavor of the vegetables. After 10 minutes, it'll look something like this. Now, add in my tomatoes, stir to combine them with the butter and the vegetables, and then using the back or the side of your wooden spoon, break the tomatoes down a little bit. You don't need to go too far on this because, like I said earlier, we're going to blend this once it's done cooking. Now we're gonna add some stock. I have these little homemade stock cubes that I make. You can just use regular stock as well. Bring that up to a simmer. We're gonna cook this, basically stirring every now and then for about an hour and a half. After 45 minutes, this is what the soup looks like. We're only halfway there. We need to cook it for another 45 minutes. So after the full 90 minutes of simmering, it's going to look like this. Let's get it off the stove and get our immersion blender out. I'm going to set this up and then put the head right into the soup and blend it, starting on low speed and then increasing to about medium speed until you get it to the thickness that you like it. Once that's done, we're going to add some cream to enrich the soup a bit and make it a little more luxurious. Stir everything to combine, and all we have to do now is taste it for seasoning. I'm going to add a little bit of sherry vinegar, a little bit of pepper, and I needed just a little bit of salt. My stock cubes are seasoned. Again, do this to your taste. Looking pretty good. Let's set this aside. Let's move on to the second part of this recipe, the grilled cheese sandwich. I'm going to use 3 different kinds of cheese to bring this up to a whole nother level. Swiss cheese, some Gruyere cheese, and some cheddar cheese. I'm going to grate these over the large holes of a box grater. This makes it so that the cheese melts better and so that they're evenly distributed. Put them in a bowl, just give them a little toss around again so that they're evenly distributed. We'll set that aside and we'll move on to step number 2 of our grilled cheese sandwich, which is tomatoes. Cut this into slices. I'm going to use a bread knife, which makes it a lot easier. We'll set those aside as well. Move to step number 3, the last step, which is to make some bacon. Where I live, bacon really doesn't exist, so I'm going to use some jamon serrano and just basically treat that as bacon. Into the skillet it goes over medium heat or so until it's crispy, and then set that aside on a plate lined with some paper towel. Now let's get some bread out. I'm going to butter this. It's probably a better idea if you let your butter soften a little bit. My butter was pretty cold, but it's still gonna work decently well. Put 2 handfuls of cheese on either side of the bread. Put your slices of tomato down. Make sure you salt your tomato, and then add my quote-unquote bacon on top. Just crush it up lightly, and very carefully take the other side of the sandwich and put it on top. And then back over the same skillet that I fried off the jamon in, I'm adding just a little bit of butter, and then over very, very low heat, we're gonna brown the first side of the sandwich. Flip that over, and then we're gonna use our secret ingredient, which is mayonnaise. Smear on just a very, very thin layer of that, and then again over low heat, I'm just gonna keep flipping this and flipping it until everything is really golden brown. The cheese is melted on the inside. There's maybe even little pieces of cheese stuck to the outside of the sandwich, and we've got our grilled cheese sandwich. I'm gonna cut that into triangles. Look how good this looks. Everything is all melted down and delicious. Let's set up a plate. We'll put our 2 halves of our grilled cheese on the side of the plate. Put our soup into the bowl. Garnish it with a little bit of chiffonade basil, and we are done. We've got our grilled cheese. We've got our tomato soup. Took a couple of hours, but most of that was the soup simmering on the stove. Certainly something if you planned a little bit ahead on a weeknight, you could certainly make this. As usual, the most important thing is let's give it a try. I don't have any utensils because I think the best way to eat this is to dunk the sandwich into the soup. It's awesome. I don't know how this grilled cheese couldn't be awesome. There's a lot of butter and mayonnaise. Sort of like a BLT almost here without the lettuce, which is one of my favorite sandwiches. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Weeknight Wednesday. If you did, smash the like button. Really helps out the channel. If you've got a grilled cheese recipe, or you've got a tomato soup recipe, or you got recommendations for another Weeknight Wednesday recipe, leave a comment down below. I love getting them. I always try and respond. But that's it for this week. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Let's get another bite. It's outrageous.